Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. We are going to present about quantitative research in basic of mathematics education research subject. We are from group 4. Next, the member are me, Tania, and my friend Ilham Roziqun Nafik and Gustin Rahma Lutfiana. We are from International Class of Mathematics Education 2019. This is the content that will be present. The first about the population, second about sample, and the third about sampling techniques, and the last about the data collection. First about introduction. Quantitative research method is a research method that uses data in the form of number and emphasizes on measuring objective result using statistical analysis. Quantitative research collects data in numerical form that can be put into categories or in order of rank or measured in unit of measurement. This data type can be used to create graph and table of raw data. This part will be explained about population. The population is defined as all the member of any well-defined class of people, event, or object. Population is not just the number of object or subject, but include all of the characteristics possessed by the object or subject. For example, in a study in which student at Semarang Senior High School, where the population of interest, and then you could define this population as all boys and girls attending SMA in Semarang. Next. This is the type of population. The first type based on size. There are three types. The first is finite population. Second is infinite population. And the last about indeterminate population. The finite population, that is if the number of members of the population can be estimated or known with certainty. In other words, the limits are clear quantitatively. For example, the number of International Class Mathematics Education Student 2019 NES. And then about the infinite population, that is if the member of the population cannot be estimated or cannot be known in number. In other words, the limit cannot be determined quantitatively. For example, the amount of water in the ocean. And the last indeterminate population is a population whose existence and number of members is not known with certainty. An example is a person who is married in an unregistered marriage, which although it is known to exist, because there are many stories and news about him, his whereabouts are known for sure, let alone the number. Next. And then this is the type of population based on the situation. There are two types. The first is homogeneous population and the second is heterogeneous population. Homogeneous population, namely a population whose elements have the same characteristic. For example, a doctor who will see a person blood type, then he simply takes a drop of a blood. The doctor doesn't need a bottle because a drop and a bottle of blood, the result will be the same. And then about the heterogeneous population, namely a population whose elements have varying characteristic or condition, so it is necessary to set boundaries. For example, researchers will measure the ability of student achievement in a school. It must measure the achievement of different students. This is the another type of population. The first is the target population is the population planned in the research plan. An example is UNES mathematics student who have ATM. Then second, the access population is the number of group member that can be found in the field from the target population. An example is UNES mathematics student who have a KTM and are active in the lecturer. Next, this part about the sample. The sample is part of the population. For example, Bina Nusantara High School student in Wonosari are a sample of Semarang High School student. The small group that is observed is called the sample, and the larger group that is generalized is called the population. Rationale of sampling. Sampling is indispensable to the researcher. Usually, the time, money, and effort involved do not permit a researcher to study all possible members of population. Furthermore, it is generally not necessary to study all possible cases to understand the phenomenon under consideration. Sampling comes to your aid by enabling you to study a portion of the population rather than the entire the population. This is about bias sample. Sample must be representative if you are to be able to generalize with reasonable confidence from the sample to the population. For example, the research might assume that the students at Washington High School are representative of American adolescents. However, the sample might not be representative if the individual who are included have some characteristics that differ from the target population. An unrepresentative sample is termed a bias sample. The finding on a bias sample in a research study cannot legitimately be generalized to the population from which it is taken. And then this is about the size of the sample. Lay people are often inclined to criticize research, especially research whose result they do not like, by saying the sample was too small to justify the researcher's conclusion. How large should a sample be? Other thing being actual, a larger sample is more likely to be a good representative of population than a smaller sample. However, the most important characteristic of a sample is its representative, not its size. A random sample of 200 is better than a random of sample of 100, but a random sample of 100 is better than a bias sample of 2,5 million. Size alone will not guarantee accuracy. A sample may be large and still contain a bias. The research must recognize that sample size will not compensate for any bias that faulty sampling techniques might introduce. Representative must remain the prime goal in the sample selection. And then this is different between population and sample. Based on definition, population is the whole subject under study, and the sample is the part of population. The characteristic of population is parameter, and for sample is statistic. And data collection from population using census, and for example using survey. And then the focus of population is identify the characteristic. For example, focus on estimating population characteristic. And this is about sampling technique will be explained by Ilham. Please, Ilham.
Okay, thank you, Nova. Next is about sampling technique. In this sampling technique, there are two techniques. There are probability sampling and non-probability sampling. The first one is probability sampling. Probability sampling is defined as a sampling technique in which the researchers choose samples from a larger population using a method based on the theory of probability. This sampling technique uses randomization to make sure that every element of the population gets an equal. Okay, the next one is sampling technique. There are two sampling techniques. There are probability sampling and non-probability sampling. The first one is probability sampling. Probability sampling is defined as a sampling technique in which the researcher choose samples from a larger population using a method based on the theory of probability. This sampling technique uses randomization to make sure that every element of the population gets an equal chance to be part of the selected sample. Okay, the next. Okay, there are some type of probability sampling. The first one is simple random sampling. The sampling method is as easy as assigning numbers to the individuals or samples and then randomly choosing from the numbers through an automated process. Finally, the numbers that are chosen are the members that are included in the sample. There are two ways in choose the samples in this method of sampling. The first one is the lottery system, and the next is random number table. Okay, next. There are some advantages of this simple random sampling. First, it is a fair method of sampling, and if applied appropriately, it helps to reduce any bias involved compared to any other sampling method involved. And second, since it involves a large sample frame, it is usually easy to pick a smaller sample size from the existing larger population. The next, the person conducting the research doesn't need to have prior knowledge of the data that is collected, and this sampling method is a fundamental method of collecting the data. You don't need any technical knowledge. You only require essential listening and recording skills. Next is there is no restriction on the sample size that the researcher needs to fit. From a larger population, you can get a small sample quite quickly. And the last is the data collected through this sampling method is well informed. Okay, next. The next step is stratified sampling. Stratified random sampling is a method in which the researchers divide the population into smaller groups that don't overlap but represent the entire population. While sampling, these groups can be organized and then draw a sample from each group separately. Types of stratified random sampling, there are two types. There are proportionate stratified random sampling and disproportionate stratified random sampling. Okay, next. There are some advantages from these types. The first one is better accuracy in results dependent on the distinction of various strata. The next is convenient to train a team to stratify a sample due to the exactness of the nature of this sampling technique. The third, due to statistical accuracy of this method, smaller sample size can also retrieve highly useful results for a researcher. And last, the sampling technique covers maximum population as the researchers have complete charge over the strata division. Okay, next. The third type is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a method where the researchers divide the entire population into sections or clusters that represent a population. Clusters are identified and included in a sample based on the demographic parameters like age, sex, locations, etc. There are two ways to classify this sampling technique. The first way is based on the number of stages followed to obtain the cluster sample, and the second way is the representation of the groups in the entire cluster. In most cases, sampling by clusters happen over multiple stages. a stage is considered to be the step taken to get to the desired sample. We can divide this technique into single stage, two stage, and multiple stage. Uh, for advantage for cluster sampling, there are consume less time and cost, and convenient access, and there is data accuracy and ease of implementation. Okay. For the last type of sampling in probability sampling, there are systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is defined as a probability sampling method where the researcher choose element from a target population by selecting a random starting point and select sample members after a fixed sampling interval. There are types of systematic sampling. The first is systematic random sampling. The second is linear systematic sampling, and the last is circular systematic sampling. There are advantages for this sampling technique. The first is it's extremely simple and convenient. The next is it is better for representing a population in a faster and simpler manner. The third is the samples created are based on precision in member selection and free from favoritism. And fourth, the chance to be highly biased, which is avoided as the members are at a fixed distance from one another. And the factor of risk involved in this sampling method is extremely minimal. And the last, in case there are diverse members of a population, this sampling technique can this sampling technique can be beneficial because of the even distribution of members to form a sample. Okay, next. Okay, there is the use of probability sampling. There are three use. The first is reduce sample bias, and the next is to make a diverse population and to create an accurate sample. Okay, next. The next is non-probability sampling. The non-probability method is a sampling method that involves a collection of feedback based on researchers or statistician sample selection capabilities and not on a fixed selection process. Outcome of sampling might be biased and make difficult for all the elements of population to be part of the sample equally. There are some types of non-probability sampling. The first is convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is a non-probability sampling technique where samples are selected from the population only because they are conveniently available to the researcher. Researchers choose these samples just because they are easy to recruit, and the researchers did not consider selecting the sample that represent the entire population. Advantage of this sampling is the first is collect data quickly. The second is inexpensive to create samples. The third is easy to do research. The fourth is low cost. And the fifth, readily available sample. And the last is fewer rules to follow. Okay, next. The next is judgmental or purposive sampling. Judgmental sampling, also called purposive sampling or authoritative sampling, is a non-probability sampling technique in which the sample members are chosen only on the basis of the researcher's knowledge and judgment. Judgmental or purposive sampling is not a scientific method of sampling, and the downside of this sampling technique is that the preconceived notions of a researcher can influence the result. Thus, this research technique involves a high amount of ambiguity. The advantage of judgmental sampling, there are constant minimum time for execution, allows researchers to approach their target market directly, and almost real-time result. Okay, next. The third, the third type is quota sampling. Quota sampling is defined as a non-probability sampling method in which researchers create a sample involving individuals that represent a population. Researchers choose these individuals according to specific traits or qualities of two kinds: controlled quota sampling and uncontrolled quota sampling. The advantage is this sampling technique is save times, research convenience, accurate representation of the population of interest, and the last is saves money. Okay, next. Okay, the next is referral or snowball sampling. The snowball sampling method is extensively used where a population is unknown and rare, and it is taught to choose subjects to assemble them as samples for research. The sampling technique can go on, just like a snowball increasing in size, till the time a researcher has enough data to analyze. There are three types of snowball sampling. The first is linear snowball sampling. The second is exponential non-discriminative snowball sampling. And the third is exponential discriminative snowball sampling. The advantage in samples, the cost is effective, and the sample has 10 subjects. Okay. There is the use of non-probability sampling. There is to create a hypothesis, can be exploratory research, and uh, budget and time constraints. Okay. Okay, the next will be explained by Gustin.
And the next part is about the data collection. The first data collection method is test. A test is a set of stimuli presented to an individual in order to elicit responses on the basis of which a numerical score can be assigned. This score, based on a representative sample of the individual's behavior, is an indicator of the extent to which the subject has the characteristic being measured. This is the type of test. The first type is standardized test. Standardized tests are published tests that have resulted from careful and skillful preparation by experts and cover broad academic objectives common to the majority of school systems. These are tests for which comparative norms have been derived, their validity and reliability established, and direction for administering and scoring prescribed. The directions are contained in the manuals provided by the test publishers. And the second type is researcher-made test. When using standardized test of achievement is not deemed suitably for the specific objectives of a research study, research workers may construct their own test. The third is norm reference and criterion reference test. Norm reference tests permit researchers to compare individuals' performance on the test to the performance of other individuals. An individual's performance is interpreted in terms of his or her relative position in a specified reference group known as the normative group. In contrast, criterion reference tests enable researchers to describe what a specific individual can do without reference to the performance of others. And the next type is aptitude test. This test is designed to measure the basic ability or talent possessed by test takers to predict future performance as a criterion. The use of this test is usually used to predict academic or work achievement. Therefore, this test is often used as a tool to select prospective students or new employees. The next is achievement test. Achievement tests are widely used in educational research as well as in school systems. They are used to measure what individuals have learned. Achievement tests measure mastery and proficiency in different areas of knowledge by presenting subjects with a standard set of questions involving completion of cognitive tasks. And the next method is questionnaire method. According to Hajar, Insyahrum, and Salim in 2012, a questionnaire is a list of questions about a particular topic given to research subject, either individually or in groups to obtain certain information, such as preferences, beliefs, interests, and behavior. In short, a questionnaire is a data collection technique through a number of written questions to obtain information or data from data source or respondents. In terms of content, questionnaires can be divided into the first is fact and information. Question about fact and information related to what is known about something to be investigated. For example, number of family members, religion, and information about something. And the second content is about opinion and attitude. Questions about opinions relate to their opinion about something, while about attitudes, it can be about feelings, beliefs, and values. And the third content is behavior, questions that refer to a person's action in relation to the object of research. In terms of question, the questionnaire can be divided into the first is questionnaire with open-ended question. Respondent can freely answer questions without any direction or details about the answers. And the second is questionnaire with closed question. It has been structured in a structured manner where the alternative answer have been determined in advance so that respondents just choose from the available alternative choice. And the third is mixed questionnaire. Combination questionnaires can cover the weakness of open and closed questionnaire, but processing data is much more difficult than closed questionnaires. The third data collection technique is interviews. Interviews are usually conducted in the form of formal meetings where the researcher really needs the skills to ask questions to dig up the required information. Most researchers use structured, semi-structured, and unstructured interview by Rowley in 2009. The first is structured interviews. Structured interviews are more similar to questionnaires, except that respondents do not write down their own answers. Semi-structured interviews are interviews in which the respondent must answer questions that have been prepared by the interviewer. Before conducting the interview, an interview guide has been prepared in the form of a list of questions or schematic and structured topics that will be explored by the interviewer. The third is unstructured interviews. This is generally used in ethnographic research that is carried out in the long term and allows respondents to express their opinion freely without intervention from the interviewer. An unstructured interview is more like a casual conversation. And this is some advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is the first is flexible because the interviewer or informant can repeat questions or answers that are not clear. And the second is can stimulate the interviewer to ask certain questions that have not been thought of at the beginning of the interview. And the third is allows the interviewer to know the informant's accent in answering questions, like fluency of answer, intonation, expression, and so on. And the fourth is this method is applied to all individuals without being limited by ability reading and writing. And the disadvantages are the first is its flexible nature can provide opportunities for questions to arise deviate from the original goal. And the second is conclusions drawn from interviews are often subjective. This depends on the interviewer's skill in asking questions and the interviewer's ability to create a good interrelationship between the interviewer and the informant. And the third is take up quite a lot of time and energy. The next technique is observation. Observational data collection has a specific characteristic when compared to the other techniques because observation is not limited to people as respondents but can also other natural objects. Observations are usually used for research relating to human behavior, work processes, natural phenomena, and what is observed is not too broad. Based on the implementation, observation can be divided into two types. The first is participant observation and non-participant observation. Participant observation is where the researcher participates in every daily activity, carries out every activity carried out by the person being studied. And non-participant observation is a data collection technique are the opposite of participating observation. Namely, where in this data collection technique, the researcher is not involved in any activity of the object under study. Researchers only as observer of the object under study. And then the observation are divided into two, namely the first is structured observation and the second is unstructured observation. Structured observation is the state of being neatly arranged so that structured observation are observations that have been systematically designed in the sense that the researcher already knows the structured data collection, clearly knows the variables to be observed. And meanwhile, the unstructured observations are observations that are not prepared for the step or are not yet known. This usually happens when the research does not know what will be observed and there is no clear direction in taking the data. And this is the end of our presentation. Thank you for your attention. I hope this can be helpful for us to learn about the basic mathematical research. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.